Thank you so much for coming today, guys. We're going to talk today about hybrid CDNs. I was really excited about this topic. I thought it was innovative. No one had thought of it. And then the keynote today had hybrid CDNs. So there you go. Tell you a little bit about, because we only got 20 minutes, and because I'm from South Georgia, I'm going to cut out the stuff about me. If anybody's interested, I worked in the CDN industry for about 10 years. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Cedexis. Cedexis has been around since 2009. They specialize in multi-homing infrastructure on the internet, and they have a rather unique way of doing that. But the way you think about Cedexis is if you've got a single CDN and you want to add a second, you can multi-home. You can essentially have multiple CDNs. Likewise, if you have a cloud instance, you can have multiple clouds. Or in the case of today's talk, we're going to talk about hybrid CDN, which is the scenario where you've got maybe one or two CDNs and you want to start adding your own nodes in there and then routing traffic to those nodes. Cedexis, headquartered in Portland, Oregon. It was founded by two guys from Akamai who had this idea of using crowdsourced data to do global traffic management. They jumped out in 2009 and did that. Essentially, this is kind of a mouthful of words, but enabling data-driven optimization of multi-vendor content delivery strategies to improve quality of service. I came up with that, so it's trademark. So let's talk about a second about what Cedexis, the two pieces of Cedexis. One is visibility. The problem is, if you think about it, once you're using public infrastructure, is you don't have a lot of visibility into what's going on the internet, right? You don't know. I mean, all you know, you might get a report from a customer that, hey, I can't get to some piece of content, and you don't know why. So you've got visibility, and then you've got control. What do you do about it once you have a problem on the internet, whether it's in a cloud, whether it's in a private data center, whether it's in a CDN? How can you route around that problem? So control and visibility, and these are reflected in our two products, one of which is called Radar for visibility, and one is called OpenMix for control, and I'll go back over that. So I've got this nifty little animated slide. If you think about the internet, it's about 75% of the latency that's in any given transaction. If you're going out to get a piece of content, about 75% of the time it takes to get that content is actually out on the internet. Only about 25% of the time is actually in the data centers where the stuff lives, right? So all the wild and woolly part of the internet is where you actually need to have the visibility to be able to route around problems. And that's what Cedexis does. Cedexis takes billions of measurements a day, so billions of measurements a day, it's roughly 3 to 6 billion a day, over 40,000 networks to every piece of public infrastructure in the world. And we take those measurements and we score them. So we know, for instance, from Comcast in New York City, is Akamai currently faster than Limelight? From Atlanta, Georgia on AT&T, is AWS faster or is Rackspace faster? So we know that. We have scores for all that. And we use those scores in our global traffic management system. Oops, I guess it doesn't work to just hit the space bar. There you go. The way we get the measurements is we use a method. Hey. Can you still hear me? Yes. All right. Sorry about that. We use a methodology called RUM, Real User Measurements. And we've deployed our tag, our radar tag, which is just a piece of JavaScript, on over 650 clients worldwide. This is across every vertical, in every geo, and that's where we get our billions of measurements from these end users a day. And if you think about the radar community, it's really made up of two constituencies. On the left, and my boss hates this slide because it's really crowded, but I like it because it shows the two pieces of the community. On the left-hand side, we've got the radar members who have deployed the tag, right? And this is obviously not 650, it's just a representative sample. And on the right-hand side, we've got the pieces of infrastructure that we measure. And so it gives you an idea of the breadth of what's going on in our operation there around radar. We're, again, just one more time, because it's really an important point, we've got measurements from every point on the planet, from every network, to every piece of public infrastructure. We also do private data center monitoring, but for the purposes of this, it's not so important. So that's radar, that's RUM, that's our RUM measurements. We feel like we've got the most comprehensive measuring system in the world. On the other side of the coin, we've got OpenMix, which is a cloud-based global traffic management system. It works at layer 7, or the DNS layer. And essentially, the way it works is it it gets a feed, which is the radar feed, and its score. So for every transaction that one of our clients makes, we hand them back the best performing piece of infrastructure that they have contractual arrangements with. So for instance, if you're in the cloud and you've got contractual arrangements with SoftLayer and Azure as your cloud partners, we can route to the best performing one of those two from where that user is. Very simple concept. As people have moved from dedicated infrastructure into shared public infrastructure, they gave up the visibility and control. The reason they gave that up is because they get cost and scalability, right? The problem with having all your stuff in a data center is, essentially it doesn't scale. At a certain point, you blow the top off of it. Whereas if it's in a cloud, you can continuously spin stuff up. So what we provide is the best of both worlds. We give you the visibility and control that you get from as if you were in a data center, but we do it with the cost and scalability of the cloud. So that is the Cedexis pitch, and then I'm going to get into a little bit about hybrid. Essentially, radar feeds OpenMix. OpenMix gets used by our users, and it's a nice little cycle of life there. I have this great little animation here that shows how it all keys together. Essentially, a redheaded woman in London goes and reads Bloomberg on British Telecom. You can see our little tag is deployed on that. The tag gets executed and it measures 4 different CDNs. In this case, it finds out that CDN2 is unavailable. It notifies radar, hey, at this time and this date, this CDN is unavailable. A bearded gent, also in London, he decides he wants to go to Tumblr that morning. He's on British Telecom. It makes a request to OpenMix. OpenMix makes a request to radar. It says, hey, CDN2 is unavailable. You better use CDN1, and it returns the thing. That's, in a nutshell, at the simplest level, how Cedexis works. There's a lot more behind the scenes, but if that gives you an idea, that's it. All right, so now let's talk about what is the definition of a hybrid CDN. Whenever I want to understand anything, I go to Dilbert. So a hybrid CDN is a content delivery environment, or it's an environment that someone builds, and it's an extension of a public CDN. And there's 2 methods, and I'll give you the examples. I have some architectural diagrams of how this gets laid out. But essentially, it's an extension of a CDN. And I got to tell you a story about Dilbert. When I was a developer, I used to thought Dilbert was the funniest guy on the planet, right? He's hilarious. He gets it. And then later on, I started managing people, and I was like, man, that guy's a jerk. And so I've always wanted to put something smart in the head of the pointy-haired guy. So there, that was it. I've fulfilled my commitment. All right, what are the 3 models we see? So we have 3 models of hybrid that we see implemented. This is the one here today is by far the most prevalent in our user base. And I'm going to give you, I've got 10 clients. We're going to go through how they have implemented this stuff. But this is the most prevalent. We call this sort of the tall model. And it's essentially when you've got 1 or more CDNs already implemented, and you decide, for the sake of cost perhaps, that you want to do some of the delivery from origin, right? So we call this occasional origin delivery. And it's essentially, you've got an origin out there, and let's say your origin is in New York City. Let's say you're up at 111/8, the Google, right? And you're in that data center and you're in an origin. Well, there's probably 4 million people in the greater New York area that would have better performance if they pulled directly from origin rather than going through a commercial CDN, right? Pretty dense area here. So in this case, we empower them to go directly from origin. We're taking measurements of that origin, just like we're taking measurements of those 2 CDNs. And when the specific case comes up where this particular user would be best serviced by delivery from origin, we can do so. And this is this model. I think roughly 50% of the clients that are doing hybrid with us right now are doing this with 1 or more origins. And again, we call this the tall model, and I repeat that because you'll get the joke in a minute. The second model here is when you're delivering from origin, and you decide, as many clients do, that hey, I've got some specific location. I've got I'm a French-speaking newspaper. there's this giant 4 or 5 mile area in Quebec where there's a bunch of French speakers and they're being poorly served. If I drop a caching server in the middle of that, and I'm going to do that again, what's going to happen is that those millions of people that are in that area, all of a sudden their service is going to dramatically improve, right? And no commercial CDN is going to think that way. No multi-tenant commercial CDN is going to care enough to put a caching node right there. But if it's your business, you care, right? And so we have many customers, and again, it's probably 30%, that they'll implement the origin delivery, and then they'll start putting cache servers out where they have really densely clustered groups of users, right? And the reason this is the middle model is essentially the way I figure it's if you've got fewer or the same number of instances, of cache instances as you do origins, then I kind of consider that the middle model. The last model is like essentially what our friends in the keynote did, right? This is full blown. You've got many cache nodes. You've built essentially a commercial CDN without the commercials. You're not charging anybody else for it. It's a purpose-built CDN. You've got multiple origins. You're doing delivery from them as well as from your caching nodes. And again, this is good for delivering video. It's good for delivering websites to mobile devices, any of the above. And it's using standards-based, caching modules that, as the next door Comcast fellow was talking, we can, this stuff is downloadable. It's open source for the most part. We're looking at Nginx, Varnish, these kind of products that you can download and use. And I'm going to give you a breakdown of which ones our clients use. So what are some of the trends that are causing this to happen now? Why didn't this happen 15 years ago? Right? Why are hybrid CDN something? I mean, I've been coming to this show for a long time, and I have not heard, actually, geez, forget hybrid, I haven't heard people talk about multi-CDN as much as they are this year. This year I've been in a number of sessions where people are talking multiple CDNs, and I've heard hybrid CDN mentioned a bunch too. Why is this all of a sudden a hot topic? Well, there's a couple of reasons. I guess one is the cost of delivery continues to increase, right? So cost. Even though the cost of transit, and you'll hear Dan talk later on, he's going to tell you the cost of transit's dropped another 15%. Back when I ran a CDN, it was horrible to have to come listen to it because you're always going, oh my God, it's going to kill us. But the fact is, it does. That transit continues to drop. However, the volumes increase, right? The videos are getting higher def. The bit rates are getting higher def, and there's just more consumption. So as long as that consumption continues to go up faster than the cost of transit goes down, you're going to have increased cost. And if you're a business this is a major part of your delivery and it's just a cost for you, this is a huge consideration. Another consideration, web performance is a huge differentiator, more so even than 10 years ago. The web has become a critical piece of the business function. And so if a video is buffering here and I go over here and it's not buffering, I'm going to continue to go to here. If my website that I'm buying my pajamas on doesn't load fast enough, I'm going to go to the one where it loads fast. And I don't have to tell you the statistics on this. You've all attended conferences where you see, the huge drop off in if a page load time is another additional 2 seconds. 50% of your people leave, right? If a video buffers, 80% of the people leave. So this is a differentiator in the business. So performance is a differentiator. Third, as I mentioned a minute ago, web proxy, the knowledge and understanding around how to build a caching engine has been disseminated. It wasn't 15 years ago. The only people who understood that kind of caching really well worked for CDNs for the most part, right? That's not true anymore. I mean, you go to a web shop and they're setting up reverse proxies in front of the origin just so for DDoS attacks, if nothing else. So people understand that technology much better than they did 15 years ago, and they're taking that knowledge and they're saying, well, hey, why can't I take this cache and put it over here, and thereby offload some of that CDN traffic? And they can. But probably most important, the primary thing that we see, and this is from Gartner. This is a report last July in Gartner. Is the rise of cloud computing has created new options that weren't available 5 and 10 years ago, right? The ability to spin up capacity in a cloud. And so many of our clients are using private or public clouds to do this, to spin these kind of caching options up. And in doing so, they save themselves a lot of money and improve performance. Hybrid adoption. So what are the reasons that CDNs aren't a good fit? Why, what are the scenarios under which a commercial CDN isn't a good fit? Well, after this morning's talk, I added steam and Pandora to this, but scale matters, right? At a certain scale, you just don't, a single commercial CDN isn't going to be the right answer. Certainly we see that with Apple and Netflix, where Netflix is a well-publicized example, where over a 2 or 3 year period, they phased out the use of commercial CDN and built their own CDN and deployed it. And it's been very successful for them. And you're going to see that over and over. So at a certain scale, and by the way, none of the customers I'm going to talk about today in a minute fall into that category, right? These are customers, in many cases, you may not have heard of, but they've found reasons to build a hybrid CDN as well. But certainly scale is one of the reasons. Another one is long tail catalogs. If you've got millions of musical assets, for instance, and only 2% of them on any given day are going to be accessed, that's not something that easily caches in a commercial CDN. It just doesn't work, right? So that's a problem, long tail catalogs. Hyper-regional audiences, I already mentioned that. If you've got a 10-mile square area where you've got a very dense set of users and you can plop down a set of varnish boxes that offload 10% of your traffic and improve performance dramatically, it's a big win. We've got clients that have extreme discomfort, let's say, with having their assets on a commercial CDN, a multi-tenant commercial CDN. They want complete control. So we've seen security be a player here, a reason that people have moved away from commercial CDNs. Highly dynamic applications. Even though the CDNs are trying to address that with DSA, you've still got certain dynamic applications that are best served outside of a CDN. And then the big one is cost containment. So let's take a few attributes of the customers that we have. So we got a number of hybrid customers. I took the top 10 and I just ran some numbers on them to try to understand what the commonalities were. And on the left-hand side, you see sort of an industry breakdown. I don't think it's any accident that the online news and entertainment is 50% of our top 10 hybrids, right? Because if you know what's happening in the news industry, right, it's extremely competitive and they're extremely cost conscious, right? Because the bottom's kind of fallen out of that industry. So over 50% of our top 10, so you can do the math here, 5 of them, are actually hybrid customers, and they've gone there primarily because of cost. We have some global enterprise web properties that have done it. We've got one travel luxury site of the top 10 and 2 e-commerce. One's a B2B and one's a B2C. On the right-hand side, and if you remember my complexity standard, 50% of them are sort of in that category of they're just doing origin delivery from two origins perhaps. 2 of them are actually doing the full-blown CDN though. 2 of them are actually building purpose-built CDNs. So for the purpose of understanding how this looks, we put together this maturity model that kind of goes from single origin, single CDN, multi-CDN to hybrid. I don't believe for a minute that everybody's going to go hybrid. That's not what we're trying to say here. What we are trying to say is at a certain scale, you will go hybrid. And we're also saying that the advantages, the pros, if you will, are much greater, and the cons continue to reduce. Now, some of the cons are bigger than others. For instance, more complex infrastructure. If you're a smallish company, taking on a lot of complex infrastructure is a problem. But it still sits out there as a single item. So let's take a look at the clients. I'm only going to probably have time to go through 3. Like I said, we have 10 here, but I'm going to give you go through the case studies, and then I've got a few more commonalities. So the first one is a French-speaking newspaper called The New Observer. They're actually called Les Nouvelles Observateurs. It's pretty good for a South Georgia guy, huh? But I decided to call them The New Observer. So what were their biggest challenges? Very much along the lines of what we already said, which is they had big spikes in, so something big happens in Paris. Some piece of news happens in Paris. They have huge international spikes in the French-speaking audiences. And if you know much about the French, they tend to cluster in certain parts of the world and have high-density clusters of French speakers. And that's what they were experiencing. And those clusters, those places weren't exactly always in places that commercial CDN service that well. I mean, there was nothing special about the place, right? But so they weren't getting great performance on their single CDN, and they couldn't figure out why. And they wanted 100% availability, and obviously they wanted to reduce cost, as I mentioned, right? That was a big deal for them. So in their case, what they did was they started putting varnish clusters in these locations. They used OpenMix, which is our global load traffic management system, and they were able to not only create a better connectivity and better performance, they were able to cut their cost in this first year times 4, right? They were able to cut their cost, into to a fourth of what their other cost had been. And what you're looking at in this diagram is the 4 varnish clusters along with the origin CDN that they had in 2014. And in this case, roughly 30% of the traffic was still running on the global CDN. By 2015, by this year, they had reduced that to 18%. I got, says to me, go quick or just be done after this case study?
How long?
I got 30 more minutes. Just kidding. I'll tell you what, I'll go through the case studies real quick and then I'll get to the data because that's kind of important. All right. So the next case study, Michelin, you've probably all heard of Michelin. It's, they've got a travel site called Via Michelin. Very different story there. They didn't want to go put varnish boxes everywhere, but they did want to bring their costs down and make their performance go up. And so what they did was they have 2 origins and 2 global CDNs, and they have about 21% of their traffic running on CDN. On the hybrid, meaning the vast majority of their traffic, 75% or so, is still on the CDN. And they're not happy, they're not going to change that, right? They're okay with that. What they're really looking for is performance. They're a very large company that wants to have excellence in performance. The last is maybe the most interesting, so I'm sorry I got to rush through it, but if anybody wants the slides, I'm happy to share them. Virtual Expo is a company that is a B2B showcase. They got 50,000 exhibitors, about 1 million products, a couple 100,000 catalogs, a couple 100,000 videos. And essentially think of, if you wanted to order a piece of nautical equipment, that was, hard to find, you could go onto their exhibition and you had a hardware store, you wanted to sell these things, you could go and buy them off the site and then sell them in your hardware store. Well, they because they were B2B, right, it's long tail content. And they also were having problems with pirates actually stealing content. So they weren't happy with their CDN usage. In 2013, they reduced all of the CDN usage to about 20% with 8 varnish boxes worldwide. Then by 2015, they got 9 varnishes, and they actually aren't a hybrid anymore as of this year. They cut ties with their global CDN, and they're running a purpose-built global CDN for a fraction of the cost of their CDN. So learnings, briefly, the reason I asked a question to our friend from Amazon this morning about what cache engines they're seeing used, in our client base, roughly 70% are varnish. So, and I'm not sure I can tell you why, but that seems to be a very popular choice. In terms of cache node deployments, currently, only about 16% is in a public cloud. However, I will share with you, the ones that are in the public cloud are the most aggressive Venti users. They're the ones that are actually deploying lots of cache nodes. So I'm seeing that growth there rapidly. And then of these 10 customers, the hybrid traffic is upward of 57%. So that means that they've reduced the CDN traffic to the minority portion of the traffic. This isn't surprising. The split in media is roughly 50-50 in terms of actual, this is delivery, again, percent delivery. And I think if you want to know more, you'll have to just ask me for the slides. All right.
We'll post the slides online.
All right, thank you.